Okay, and I just hit record and welcome to the Q&A kind of catch up for Washington State University. Yay, 2019. There's no real form or formula to this. I've got a couple things to demonstrate with the workbooks and that kind of stuff. And also I want to apologize, I had mentioned this. The course was all set to launch on January 1st, and I went into the learning management system and I started the whole thing up and kept wondering, where is everybody? And it turned out I was working on the wrong program. So we got started a little bit delayed, but how's everybody doing? Anybody have anything in specific they want me to cover?
Can we backtrack on the numbers in the spreadsheets, or are the fields kind of, because if we wanted to play with the acres and the barrels per acres and stuff like that, is that determined upon some of the numbers that we can't change, or can we kind of backfill?
Well, that's kind of the thing that I've got queued up so we can go in and play around with that. So
okay,
you get extra credit. We've got the main site, which is the learning management system from Washington State University, and I think everybody's gotten into their introductions. And when I finally got to the right course myself, I found out everybody's going like, "Where is this program?" And again, also apologies for those of you who didn't know that the workbooks are included. All the refunds have been made for the people who inadvertently signed up. But now we know what we could charge people. So what we're looking at is this is actually my company's website and tools that we're developing. And has anybody had any trouble getting to this point in finding the cost of goods workbook?
Nope.
No, worked out good.
Good. We've been doing this for a long time. And a little bit of the background on this, about 30 years ago or more, I started, instead of teaching wine from all the trivial facts and figures and language and whatever, I started to take sort of a business recreation approach. And at first it was just sort of open-ended, and we drink wine and talk about it and look at the wineries and the business. And then I was with Beringer Vineyards and what's now Treasury Wine Estates for 11 years, and created workbooks for Let's Start a Winery. Then I was on the board for the development of the wine program at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in the early 90s, and was working with their faculty, and we put all the workbooks into spreadsheets. And then 8 years ago, I started teaching at Sonoma State University, and we found a way that we could put these workbooks online. So that's kind of the background behind this. And it used to be just one single workbook, but as you see, you all have access to a whole slew of workbooks. The primary one for this course is going to be the winery cost of goods workbook. And you're free to go in and play with the other workbooks to your heart's content. And depending on your area of expertise and what you're looking to get out of this entire program. So if you're a tasting room manager or looking in that end of things in hospitality and events, that's great. If you are starting or own or want to learn more specifically about vineyards, we've got what we think is a really cool vineyard profit and loss and cash flow workbook. But it's the winery cost of goods, and you open it for the first time by going to this page, selecting that, and hitting new. Now, Saving a workbook, there's a couple steps. When you open a new workbook, you want to hit save. And if you watch it, can you see the top of my screen up here, the URL? When I hit save, it's going to create a new URL. And this is where your workbook is stored. It's not stored on your computer. So Gail, as we talk about going back and playing and changing numbers, what you'll want to do is after you hit save, you bookmark this.
Yeah.
And depending on what kind of browser you're using, you click on this.
Yeah.
And I actually have a folder that I keep all my Wine Biz Sim projects in, because you're going to actually have access to this for a while, because we're resetting some things with the course. But once you've created a workbook, you can work on it, you can save it, you can re-access it, enter new numbers. At any time that you liked, you can also then clone it and make a copy of it, and then make sure to save and bookmark it in the same way. And if you're working from a separate computer, if you work on one at home and one at business, or maybe a laptop and a desktop, you've got to have this URL up here to reopen a project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, the fields I was talking about was actually in the workbooks, like the cost of goods per case.
Yes.
Are some of those, I realize that the numbers are dependent upon what numbers you enter into the specific fields, like on line 3. If you're going to have the 3,000 cases, you can play with that number. But if you go into like the grape costs and things like that and see how many acres you need to produce X number of cases or bottles of wine, can you start playing with that to find?
Yeah, let me go through this step by step. Perfect. Okay. Now, if you're ever in your workbook and you can't enter anything, all right, make sure then to go up and hit edit. It needs to show save, and now I'm in the editable version. Okay, so like you're saying, you can change this. I can put in 10,000 cases, and instead of entering instead of hitting enter, you can either click somewhere else off the page or hit tab, and then it's going to give you all your revised numbers for gross margin, total revenue, and everything else, right?
Yeah, got it.
Good on that. All right. On grape costs, we actually have this preloaded with a mistake so that we can make sure people are going in and paying attention, because a blend has to be 100% of the different grapes, and this is 150%, right? Now, on this page, I'm going to go ahead and open this up to full page, because also if you've got a small screen, or if you have the screen minimized, sometimes it jams up some of your areas here. Okay. So is this the page that you were talking about, Gail?
No, I was actually in the, if you go back up to I think it's the grape, if you go back up to the grape, the production.
Yes.
And I was playing with that, and then I went into the second workbook for this week, and because it had said when I finished it that I needed 8.45 acres to produce how many cases I was going to produce. So I started doing the how many barrels does an acre produce, and then what's the yield. And so on your grape costs, when you have the yields and stuff like that published, can we take the crush reports from California or Washington State and populate those fields, or are they pre-populated and we can't change them?
No, is that in the vineyard profit?
I think it might be. I don't remember. I was toggling back between 2 worksheets that I'd saved, trying to figure out what I could change and what I couldn't change.
Okay, this is going to be the primary workbook to focus on.
Okay.
And then the vineyard profit and loss and forecast, that's optional.
Okay.
All right. And we should have a little bit of time to actually even cover this, but this is the one that we should be focusing on. You know, put in your name or the wine name and vintage. And there's two ways that I recommend working on this workbook. One, if you have a wine or a winery, or you're planning to have a wine or a winery, you could do this as a business development exercise. So if I were making Tim's exquisite red blend from Bend, you know, you can do your work up that way. For many of the people in the course are more of what we call at the newbie level, and in most cases, it's probably a good idea to do a case study to find a wine, and then I'll go through where to find information and how to get some of the numbers. Okay, so you put in the wine name and the vintage. It could be a case study. It could be fanciful, or it could be your own. The winery name. Put in the date and then your name. Now these are important because if anybody ever loses or can't get back to your project, just send me an email. I've got on our system, we can get back to your URL, but remember this is what gets you back to your project. Okay. So for the winery cost of goods, the things that you can change are total production of this wine, and then the FOB or ex-seller's price, which is the selling price from the winery to a wholesale distributor, or it's a price that you would use if you're exporting the wine and somebody says, what's your price list? This would be the price that you would quote. And if this wine is intended only, let's say, to be sold in your tasting room or online or in your wine club, then we'll talk about a little bit later the best practice. You need to establish, regardless of whether it's being going into a more traditional distribution or direct to consumer, you should establish an FOB winery selling price so that you can run the finances of your winery, that you can have incentives, you can have bonuses for the winemaking team and operations and those kind of things. So this would then be the price you would use to transfer the goods over to your tasting room and to your wine club, etc. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. And the changes that you can make, this is called a stepper. And the reason we have this is if you look at my gross margin and look at my estimated retail selling price, as I go up in price, you'll see my margins going up, but also everything's remaining the same downstream in the supply chain, if you will. So the price on the shelf is also going to be going up, okay? And the price going down. So one of the things I want you all to learn is the relative price points. If a wine sells at $140 a case with sort of standard freight, shipping, and taxes, distributor markups, selling it to a retail store, grocery store, fine wine shop, and they mark it up, this is sort of a guideline. $140 FOB would typically translate to about 26 bucks retail. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That was one question I had. Does a winemaker, do they ever have a goal to keep in a certain price range? Obviously, like $2 Chuck, they obviously have to keep their business to be able to sell the wine at that price. Do other wineries do that? Try to stay in the $20 to $30 range when they're starting?
Well, it's all part of a. We're going to go through things in a systematic fashion, following the supply chain, right?
Okay.
And that's not how many businesses run.
Okay.
So a lot of people start a winery and start the process by doing market analysis and seeing what's out there and seeing if they could find a product that fits a certain need. All right.
Okay.
They might start their winery because they have a passion for a certain grape variety or a certain region. And so they're really going to start it based on a style model and that comes with sort of a price range.
Okay. All right.
Some people own orchard or strawberry fields or whatever and say, Jesus, look at all these wineries opening up around me. We should get into this. What, you know, let's start a winery. And that's an awful lot of wineries all around the world. And so you start literally with a piece of ground, then what's going to grow best here? How much can I charge for it, et cetera, et cetera. And when we get into the marketing lesson, we'll be talking about the various processes of what's called ideation. Oh, I've got an idea, right? And then you start to look at the parameters. Okay, well, I want to make this style wine. I'd like it to have it from this region, and then you've got to be thinking, you know, what kind of price category would this fit?
Okay.
And so you can start with, you know, I want to make a $200 reserve Cabernet Sauvignon with all these bells and whistles. You know, my vision is that we're going to get 98 points from Robert Parker or the Wine Spectator Wine of the Year, and you're working on that basis. Two Buck Chuck was started because there was a collaboration between Trader Joe and Bronco Wine Company. Freddie Franzia, who kind of got kicked out of the Franzia wine family, we won't go into that, but he was able to say, hey, you know, I can grow grapes in a parking lot and I can create good wine, and I've got the production know-how and facilities that I can make this stuff really inexpensively. And Trader Joe's said, you know, yeah, well, how inexpensively? They said, really inexpensively. They said, okay, we'll put you to task. We'll commit to X tens of thousands of cases, and we're going to sell it for $2 a bottle, $1.99. And we don't want to lose money, but we're going to use this as a huge promotional tool. So we don't necessarily need to make money. If you really want to be impressed, enter case production of 1 million cases. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then come up with an FOB of $15. It's going to take a second to step down there. Because remember, the wine's got to be shipped, taxes have got to be paid, there's bottles and boxes and this and that. But if you were to produce a wine for $24 a case, all right, so far we're losing $10 million. They're not.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? What would you pay for grapes? Here's what I want you all to really give up. Oh, it's crap, you know, it's horrible, it's bad for, stop it. The French drank wines that today, if two Buck Chuck were available in France 50, 60 years ago, it would be better than probably 90% of all the French wines being produced. Okay. I want people to break up your thinking, break up the cliches, and break up a lot of the wine education you may have picked up, because so much of our teaching is downright fantasy and even misinformation and a lot of pseudoscience. Okay, So that's a really great question. How can somebody produce something at this when most wineries can't even buy empty bottles, boxes, corks, and capsules for $24 a case?
How much money did he make off of it?
A lot.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's because he knows how the business works. Now, how does Screaming Eagle work? Or somebody take one of your favorite really high-end wines. What comes to mind? Top quality, really expensive. What's out there?
It's hard to get a hold of.
So what happens if you make a 500 cases of a wine that's going to have an FOB of over $1,000 a case? All right, so we're at a $200 retail. It's only $500 a case, or there's only 500 cases, but look at the kind of margin that we're working with. It's pretty incredible. And here's what you guys need to get. The easiest thing in the world is to make really expensive wine. So yes, it's hard to grow. It requires specific things and whatever, but it gives you an amazing bankroll to market it and to offer inducements and incentives and so on. So anyways, that's kind of the extremes to think about. And at the end of this course, I don't care what you turn in, as long as you turn in the project, okay? What I want you to do is play with this. Make another copy. As we go through, you'll have the ability to play around with this a lot. And I want you to get kind of addicted to it, all right? So if we go back to let's go back to 10,000 cases. And let's get back down here to reality of about $140 a case. And as we go through this, you're also going to see why red blends are such an amazing, well, I think I can actually, you can go into this also and just plug in a number. So if I wanted to hit 140, I'd just put it in and then hit tab. Okay, and there we are again. All right. The next tab then allows you to go in and say, well, I can't have 150% of one grape. So the mistake is that I've got Cabernet Sauvignon here at 100%, and then I've got Merlot at 50. Does anybody have a favorite sort of red blend idea for like different grape varieties, Rhone, Bordeaux?
I got a Rhone that I was doing on my red blend project.
Perfect. And
Oh,
what was their primary grape?
Hold on. Sorry, it's on my other notebook here.
Oh, that's all right. Actually, I'll just drive through it, and I'll probably be fairly close. It's very likely Syrah based. If Grenache is typically blended in the Rhone, then you've got. Let's see what else. Interestingly enough, in the Rhone in France, Viognier, a white grape variety, is co-fermented and added quite frequently. So I'm just going to throw that in there for kicks. And then you may decide, because if you're doing this in the U.S., you're not bound to the laws of the Rhone area of France. So you could add some Petit Syrah or some Zinfandel, or different varieties. And if there's a variety that you're working with that's not on the pull down list, you can actually either just leave this blank, put it in, and then note over here that you're using Mataro or something like that, or an obscure grape that wouldn't be in there. or you can go down and enter it in here. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, another way to use this workbook, let's say I'm making 100% Pinot Gris or Pinot Noir or something, I can also use this blending workbook. Maybe I'm getting my Pinot Noir for a number of different vineyards, or my own vineyards, but from different parts, and they have different farming costs. So I could make these all Pinot Noir and then put, you know, from which grower or from which vineyard and so forth, if I'm getting Pinot Noir at different prices. Okay. So then the next thing is, now I've got to go and clean up my blend. So let's say that I've got 50% Syrah, and that I'm going to use 25% Grenache, and I'm going to only use 5% Viognier because of neighbor let me have some really cheap, and it lets me tell a cool story. All right, and sometimes that's what the decision is. And let me go back up here. And then I'm going to use my Mataro. And then you can see I've got a 20% balance. There you go. All right, now I've got this at 100% where it should be. I've got these four varieties at these percentages. Syrah, if I'm a good negotiator or whatever, I might be able to get for $1,800 a ton. Grenache might be, let's just say, for kicks and giggles, it's a little more expensive because, actually, let's make it a good bit more expensive, because it's really good Grenache from and there's a, let's say that there's a tighter supply of that. Viognier we're getting for, let's say, $1,500 a ton. And then our Mataro, the reason we're putting Mataro in there is we're going to use the French name for it, and we found it for $800 a ton. Okay, right? So this is going to give me my percentages. This is going to give me the allocated. So in this blend, as a percentage of the blend, these are the costs. My total cost per ton is $17.35. We've got that in a couple places, and that's the grapes we're using. If I'm using this to forecast for my costs next year, and I'm looking at grape supplies and costs are coming down, or if a certain grape variety gets hot and so forth, I can actually adjust my blend for business reasons. Any of you ever done the wine blending at a winery or something, and they give you the different varieties and everybody makes their own blend?
Nope.
No.
You're going to have a chance to do it in the course. And the way it's usually done is a very unrealistic, you add a little bit of this and a soupçon of this, and everybody, you know, tries to come up with the best blend. But what's really going on in a blending session is they're looking at the cost of the material they're working with. They're looking at their grape sources. And what they're trying to do, yes, they're trying to make the best balanced, most flavorful wine possible, but they're looking at their gross margin and they're looking at profitability. And what's the best wine that we can make that's going to give us the best gross margin to cover salaries and bonuses and overhead and investment in the winery and, operations and payroll and new barrels, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, you're looking at grape costs as an imperative part. So Ted, going back to, all right, we envisioned this wine was going to sell for a certain amount. Now, how do we be price competitive in the category that we're going at, and then totally maximize our margin, because that's running a profitable and sustainable business.
Okay.
And it puts a whole different tilt on how things are done in the business of wine. And then it could be, we could say, you know what, we tried this blend, and so right now we're at about $450,000 gross margin. If I put 40% of the Mataro and then tweak this down a little bit to 20% of the Grenache and 35%, and then you would run a trial of that blend and see, does that meet the flavor expectations of the market, of the critics, of our distributors, of our wine club members, and whatever. And oh, great, because we just made another $38,000 on our bottom line.
What happens if nobody buys it?
Then you've either screwed up in your market assessment, you've screwed up in your business plan, or you've screwed up in executing your business plan. And I'll tell you what, right now, there are so many wineries that quite frankly can hardly even give it away. All right. And it's usually, oh, hi, Julie, who's our friend? Is that Boots?
This is Whiskey.
Whiskey?
Yeah.
Right on. Did you name it?
Yeah.
Okay. Just looking for insights into your personality. Okay. So this is the business of grapes, and then the vineyard calculator that you can go in and play with. We'll go back to that in a minute, Gail, because we'll look at, what then, drives these prices.
Yeah.
Right. And again, and when you go into the Grape Crush report, you're going to go in and find Syrah from certain areas of California that might be $300-400 a ton.
Yep.
Because one of the challenges in wine business is the planning cycle. So let's say that we're having a conference call. We all agree we're going to do a red blend with these grapes and whatever, but we're going to start an estate business. We're going to launch this business. We're going to buy the land, plant the vineyards, build the winery, and do that. How long is it going to be before we've got product? Any estimates?
5 years.
5 years at best. Could be 5 years before we get the transaction finalized for the real estate, get the environmental impact reports or anything like that, get our permits, and even begin to plant. So 5 years is not a bad estimate, but it could be 10 years. And the question then becomes, going back to Gail's, what do you do if you don't sell it? You can't believe how many wineries are started with a vision of a product and a price point that makes total sense when they start, but by the time they finally have a product ready for market, sideways occurred and you planted Merlot. Or Syrah seemed like it was the next big thing and everybody planted, everybody started making it, and then it plateaued and started to fall, and you're just opening your winery, okay? So this is kind of the mindset and the way it all works, okay? Now on the next page, we're actually going to do a wine blending project, and in this workbook, though, you can put in a certain percentage of bulk wine. Don't do it for this project. Just make this kind of 100% as if you're processing all the fruit. But you would put what percentage of the bulk wine you're going to use and what your cost per gallon is down in the bottom left here, okay? But for this, we're just going to do this. This is a real critical number because this is the estimate of how many cases of finished wine we're squeezing out of the press from 1 ton of grapes, right? So this is a critical number, in the production world. 60 cases could be considered a really good generalized guesstimate. But if we were making that $200 bottle of wine, we might only be getting 50 cases. If you're making ice wine or late harvest wine, you might only get 30 cases because you've got dehydrated grapes or positively moldy grapes, and so on. So the range for this could be anywhere from 50 cases per ton. And again, watch my margin up here, okay? As I go back up to 60, that'll get us back up to where we were, and we're at 488,000. Oh, if I could just squeeze maybe just 4 or 5 more cases, wow, look at what that does to my bottom line. And this is actually the process. If I'm looking at $1 million new press, and I'm making a number of different wines and know that I'm going to be using it for the next 10 or even 20 years, then I start to look at what will this press do for the quality of my wine in general? Does it have an advantage or not in just general quality? Will it allow me to get more juice out of the grapes, usable juice? And then how does it pay for itself over time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the wine press conversion factor is based on the tonnage, which can depend upon what type of grape, how many, what type of weather you have in terms of how.
Nope. A ton, you've got X amount of grape tons that you're going to need. This is our grape tonnage.
Okay.
This is a conversion factor converting 1 ton of grapes into how many cases of wine.
Okay.
And so then, yep.
But where does it show how many acres of fruit that you need in order to produce a ton of fruit, a ton of grapes?
That's the business of vineyards.
Okay.
And so what you need to do now is if you're growing your own, so let's say it's an estate, and we'll go through all sorts of different production models. But what we call the estate model is you own your own vineyards, you own your own winery, you harvest your grapes, you usually have 2 separate companies, you sell them to your winery, you process it, you bottle it, you package it, and off it goes. All right?
So you kind of know how much each acre produces from a grape because it's your own vineyard?
Correct, but you also do if you're purchasing the grapes from somebody too.
Okay.
And so the business of grapes is then as a business owner, knowing what vineyard you're working with, and it's also a big part of the forecasting that we'll get into later in the course.
Okay.
Is kind of how this all comes together.
Okay.
All right. So in this case, all we're looking at is we need almost 160 tons. And as I go down back to my 60 or even below, notice now I'm at 172 tons that I need. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. Now, if it's my own vineyards, I've got to talk to the vineyard manager and say, we're forecasting for 10,000 cases of this. How are you going to manage the yield? How are you going to ensure that when we harvest things that we've got enough of the grapes we need? If you're going to find less and less businesses that actually own their own vineyards, and the reason is because it gives me so much more flexibility as a producer to say, okay, I'm going to have a contract with this grower for these amount of tons. I'm going to need this. If the vintage comes up crappy and the quality goes down, that also usually corresponds to less juice to work with. and it's going to change my conversion and my grape needs. Now, if my business plan says I need to, my sales team, my marketing team says we can sell 10,000 cases, then I've got to ensure then that I know what my grape needs are so that I can have the production to make my numbers out there. Now, what if I'm planning on 10,000 cases of this wine, and then all of a sudden supply and demand is shifting, which it is right now actually in wine consumption in the US, and maybe this wine that we thought was a great idea a few years ago is trending down even more. So what would then happen, all things being equal? And then I would clone my project, and then I'd go back to my project info and says, right now we're making $475,000, but I'm being told that we're going to lose 20% of our production, so I've got to plug in, or that we're not going to be able to sell 10,000 cases. What's that going to do to my bottom line? I put in the new number, and boom, we're losing. That's $100,000 of margin that we've just lost.
Mm-hmm.
So when you read things about problem vintages or freezing in Chablis where it destroyed the vines and they lost over 25% of the entire crop, this is what's happening to the wineries. Does that make sense?
Yep.
When the wildfires get so bad that they taint the grapes, or if there's incessant rains like in 2011 in the north coast of California, the grape prices went up, the grape quality went to crap, and the conversion rate went down as well. And this is the business impact of the confluence of those things happening. Okay? All right, let me put this back to 10,000. All right. So the other thing in this, again, depending upon why you're taking this course and how much detail you need, there's a number of different production options, and we've got a kind of a rough guesstimate of what somebody might expect to crush a ton of grapes. And remember, we're working on a per ton basis, because if you went to a custom crush facility and asked them how much would it be to make our Cabernet, they would give you a per ton processing amount. And sometimes they'll give you an amount of $250 a ton. It could be $1,250 a ton. It depends on the facility, it depends on the type of wine, and it depends on a lot of the things that you would ask to be done for the fruit, okay? If you are a winery, you should work with your accountants so that you know your cost of processing per ton. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's say that it was a crappy vintage and we're getting a lot of mold on the grapes, and we've got to go through and sort them. So it might be when you're receiving the grapes that you've got additional pre-ferment, before you even begin fermentation, you might have extra costs. You might have to get special equipment or extra payroll just for this one wine, and so forth. So there's a number of ways you can put in exceptional or additional costs based on a certain vintage situation, labor, equipment, or wine needs, okay? And then lab work, and again, that can be plugged in if you care. Then the other thing is that we're not going to worry about the bulk wine, but by the end of this course, you're going to know a lot about bulk wine. And don't think bulk wine means cheap wine. When Chateau Lafite Rothschild is doing their blending of wine, until it goes into a bottle, it's considered bulk wine, okay? Screaming Eagle, until it goes into a bottle, is bulk wine. It's in winery lingo, you would talk about it as material. All right, we don't have the material in the bottle yet. So whether it's the winery's own inventory, whether they're purchasing finished wine from another winery or from a broker or whatever, bulk wine is simply wine that is not yet in the bottle. Doesn't mean cheap, and it doesn't mean inexpensive or low quality in any way. Then we've got to also account for the state, federal excise taxes. We'll go through that in another part of the course. But if you kind of want to see what tax details are, if you click on that little link that I just showed you, it'll open this up in a new tab and give you all the tax classifications and for different quantities and different alcohol levels, and for mead or fruit wines and low alcohol and all that kind of stuff, okay? And that was this down here. Okay, so once we've got that, now we've got our own material, and our material is costing us $42.36 to make the wine, and this is $42.36 of enough wine to make a case of wine when we get it in the bottle. Is that pretty clear?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, barrels. Barrels are so much more complicated than most people think. And my job is to complicate things. We've got this set up so you can run 4 different barrel programs for a single wine. You can name this, let's say, New French Oak, if you wanted. You might have other used barrels that you have in your winery that you're going to age part of the wine or all of it in later. And maybe some of that's American oak. And then we could also have used French, because if we're having new French, you can only have it new 1 year, and then it becomes used. Okay, does that make sense? So the primary factors that determine how much your oak program works, how much of the wine is going into barrels, how long is it going to be in barrels, and let's say we're going to put, we're only going to put 10% new French oak. We're going to use 20% of used American oak, and then we're going to have 70% of this go into used French oak, okay?
So does that mean, can I ask a question? Does that
Sure.
mean that out of X number of barrels, it spends 10% in the new French oak, 20% of the time in the used American, 70% in the used French, or it gets divided and then it gets mixed afterwards?
So we're going to take our 10,000 cases,
Okay.
and we're going to put 10% of the volume
Okay.
into new oak for how long, and then the duration also is going to factor into the ultimate cost and profitability. So notice the longer my 10% is in new oak, here's my gross margin up here. If I go, right now we're 7 months and our gross margin's 420,000. If I go to 8 months, that costs me $15,000. Okay. So this allows me then to determine and to toggle back and forth, right? What does the winemaker say that our oak aging should be, but what does the CFO say it ought to be? and the CFO's going, you know, thank you, Mr. Winemaker. I know you'd love all this new French oak, but do you want a paycheck? Do you want workers? Do you want us to stay in business? And again, it's the critical interface between people in different job functions, what you envision for the wine, what's really possible given the price range, and so forth. Now, these are the key things. So making sure you've got a type of wine and what percentage of which and for how long. And frankly, for a $25 wine, it's really hard to justify a lot of new French oak. But could we put, and here's part of your homework. Have everybody been going into the store and looking at labels?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if I say on the label, aged in French oak barrels, what does that really mean? Does that mean all of the wine went into French oak barrels? Or can I do that with just a little bit of the wine in French oak and the rest in American oak? Because I'm not telling the whole truth, but I'm not lying. And welcome to the wine business. This is so pervasive, you can't believe it. All right.
Wow.
Our struggling vines of the low yield and whatever. Yeah, right. How do you stay in business if you give me the numbers you're giving me? So people lie. And there's also laws and regulations in certain areas where it's harder to not tell the truth. Right? So that's this is the cynical end of the business of wine. All right. Now, let me just run through this real quickly because I do want to end this within an hour. The other considerations, how much did your new French barrels cost? What are you going to do with them when you're done? And in this case, I'm just going to transfer them to and kind of sell them to myself. So that's why these 900 and 900. And for this used French oak, I'm just going to buy those kind of on the oak. I can buy those for $300 a pop. And when they're done, we're going to sell them for $50 each as delightful planters to put on your deck or patio, or give them to the Boy Scouts or something. There's actually in Napa, there's a big Boy Scout program where Boy Scouts buy and sell and transact barrels to raise money for the Boy Scouts.
Wow.
I know, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So then this gives me the net cost of the barrels for the life of use and how many years I'm going to use them. And let's say on my used French oak, we're going to use those for 6 years, right? And so now we can toggle these numbers up and down and so forth. Very few people really know the impact of an evaporation rate. Evaporation rate is why you maintain humidity and temperature, and also for the chemistry of what's going on in the barrel. But if you've got the wrong conditions, you could have a 10% evaporation rate. And I'm going to take our used French oak, and we're at $435,000 gross margin. And what would happen if we put that into an environment where we had a 10% evaporation rate? Oops, why is that not? Oh, and that we're spending $35 a gallon for the topping wine for that. Ooh, right? And that's just the evaporation. So we're going to make sure that we have it in a storage facility, whether it's our own, it's a warehouse or whatever, that has the correct storage so that we can get this down to, say, 4%. And right now we're at $380,000. And by just making the right decision on storage, that was a $42,000 decision to get it in the right barrel storage facility. And that's just the evaporation of the wine, okay? Now, if we use cheaper wine to refill, we can change that down here. Let's say that we've got some wine that we have there. So we can make a little bit more money up here with that and those kind of things. But that's how this page works, okay?
Okay.
So, yes. Cellaring and storage, then you're not done. You've got to keep the wine in refrigerated stainless steel tanks just after fermentation. You may not age in barrel. You might age in tanks. You might use a little bit of oak because it's so expensive, and you might choose to use oak alternatives, which are. Hang on. This is new medium toast spicy French oak. And I can put this in like in a tea bag and put it in. I can just scatter it in the wine. This is a very expensive, extreme complex French oak stave, new oak equivalent liquid that I can put in my wine. You can talk to 100 wineries and 100 winemakers about their wine. They will never tell you that they use any of this. It is big business, so somebody's using it. Okay. and then you might be able to say, God, you know what? What if I could have, $5,000 worth of oak alternatives that I'm going to add to my wine, and then I'm going to go back to my barrel cost. Let's stop this insanity. And let's put it in barrel for a little bit of time. So you can say aged in French oak barrels, but you can make the character using adjuncts, additives, chips, blocks, staves, or something. And woohoo! Let's go and pay for a new pair of shoes. All right. So there's a lot of variables in cellaring and aging. Most of the cellar treatments are part of the winemaking cost, but sometimes things might occur that you need to do additional stuff. And then also once you've bottled your wine and have it ready to go, you usually hold it for a month or 6 months or sometimes even a couple years before you release it. So you've got storage costs, and so on and so forth. So that's what that covers. And then we get to the packaging and bottling. We'll go through some exercises and how much does a bottle cost? And again, we're looking at $36 packaging cost per case, and that's not far off for this wine we're making. But maybe we could change the bottle type. Maybe it doesn't need to be such heavy glass or this or that. And we could to bring this. Now this is per bottle. So if I'm able to get $1.20 for that, again we're at $470,000 gross margin. We just made $36,000 by getting our bottles for 30 cents a bottle cheaper. So these are big decisions because they're we got 10,000 cases and 12 bottles per case, so that's a big difference. Okay. Then you've got to fill the bottles and so forth, and that gives us our finished cost of goods for producing a bottle of wine. There are so many infographics, what goes into the cost of a bottle and so forth. By the time we're done with this course, I want you all to have a really, really good grasp of what goes into the cost of a bottle of wine, and then to also be able to appreciate a really good, inexpensive wine, because it's harder and harder to produce. And yeah, so there you go. And then the other thing I want to look for oddities. Here's an oddity. That's a wine bottle. It's about 2 feet tall. It's an Italian Chardonnay Pinot Grigio that sold at Trader Joe's a year ago holiday for $15.99, I think.
Wow.
How much did this bottle cost? And this isn't out of somebody's just plain inventory. This is a custom bottle that's heavy as hell. The boxes are a royal pain in the neck. They are not standard size in the distributor's warehouse on a pallet in a shipment. It doesn't fit in your refrigerator. It doesn't fit in a wine rack, certainly not a wine cooler. What the hell were they thinking? And is it anything sustainable at that price? And the answer is no. This was a one-off, and there are reasons that it was able to be sold profitably. And if it's coming from Italy, it could have been heavily subsidized. Right? So we'll talk about the dynamics of international trade, and I want you guys to find pictures of products or pricing. If you're in a tasting room, if you're in a restaurant, take a picture if you can of the label and put it up on share it with the class on the discussion forum. And what I want us to do now that you've done the first little thing, go in and look at the red wine blend section. We're going to kind of deepen those discussions about different products we find, or pricing, or displays and promotions. And so that then you'll have an idea how you can back into, what kind of factors went into the cost and the price and the profitability of the different wines. That make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Then real quickly, if you want to go to one of the other workbooks, but again, let's all focus on this one for a bit. But I do want you all to take a look at, I'm going to save this, then I'm going to go to auto filter up here on the left. I am going to then go down and open up my Vineyard and Cat workbook and start a new one of those. And this is the one I think you were referring to, Gail, correct?
Yeah, I started playing with this one too.
Absolutely, and play with them all.
Yeah.
The key factors in a vineyard profitability, number one, what were your development costs? This is actually where you would start. How much did the land cost?
Mm-hmm.
Any ponds, dams, water rights, frost systems, clearing, grading. So this is very, very complex. But again, it's going to give you, when you see an acre of vineyard, you're going to go, ooh, you can't believe what went into this. Plant material, vine spacing, sheds, amenities, all this kind of stuff, right? So that's your development cost. The next thing is your expenses. These are annual expenses for harvesting, for labor, for management, for different tasks that are performed, for all your nutritional supplements for the soil and fertilizers, different types of leaf and soil tests to make sure that you're balancing the nutrients, fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, crop regulators. Maybe you're going organic. You've got to find out what are you allowed to do and not allowed to do. And then if you're also going organic, you're going to have expenses for maintaining whatever organic certification or whatever. So we'll talk about this a little bit more deeply, and we can discuss any of these on the discussion forum, all right? But at the end of the day, what we get is, what's our gross margin and so forth. And then the primary drivers then, if you leave all that alone, if I'm growing, what's your favorite grape variety, Gail?
Zin.
Zin? Okay, so I'm going to name this Gail's Old Vine Zin Vineyard. I can put the address or whatever in that in here. If you're selling Zin at kind of the high end, you might be able to get $3,000 a ton, but because there's there's so much acreage and so forth, you'll typically get a lot less. So if I change the average price per ton I'm able to get, and this is where you can go into the crush report and then look, you know, in the Lodi area or Napa or Sierra Foothills or whatever, and see what that's actual transaction prices that are in the Great Crush Report. So what I'm going to do is right now at $3,000 a ton, my gross margin was for my 25 acres was $171,000. When I enter the $2,000 a ton, well, why didn't it change my gross margin? Hang on. All right, I may have a bug in this. Yep. All right. So anyways, the key things is how much per ton and how many tons per acre are you getting? That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing that we have down here is then a forecasting. If this is what I'm getting and this is my gross margin per acre, I can look and see, okay, here's 4 tons at $2,000 a ton, and that equals what I'm getting. If I were able to get 5 tons per acre, you can see I actually double my my gross margin, and that's because my fixed costs are staying the same, but I'm getting twice as much fruit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So this gives you a little matrix to look at. And so go in and play, you know, you could absolutely start playing with these numbers. And if you're getting ready to plant a vineyard, and that's why you're taking this course, a little later on, we can have some exercises for anybody who's interested to do a deeper dive into this workbook, okay? And here's the link to the California Grape Crush for anybody who's not been into it yet. All right, we're over an hour, so I'm going to need to wrap up. Did this help you guys out? I hope somewhat.
Definitely.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thanks for
All right,
taking the time.
This has been recorded. I'm going to post this unlisted on YouTube, and I'll send everybody a link. So if you want to go back through and review it, and certainly for the people who weren't able to make this, and then we can probably have another one of these sessions. Even next week, if you guys would like, we'll just sort of gauge how much or how little you guys would like to do with these. Okay.
I do have one. I have one question on the video thing that says Friday with Ron, and I forget his last name. Do we have to register for that class? There's a page that says register. So do we?
Oh, no, that's totally optional.
But I mean, if we want to do it, do we have to register?
I don't. I'm not sure. That's Rob McMillan with Silicon Valley Bank.
Okay.
And he's awesome. Highly recommended. I don't know if you register, they send you a password. You can register and not show up. And they also record it. So if you miss it, you can, when you go to their site, they'll have information and they'll post the recorded version of that as well.
Okay.
Could I ask one quick question about our February 9th and 10th on-site weekend? Will we get a schedule for that or anything like that coming up? Do you know about that? Or
I have no freaking clue, but I'll be there.
Okay, all right. Is it Mr. Harlow that we would maybe get that from? Or
yes, exactly. Just send a quick note to Byron. When are we getting the info? And
okay.
And let me know. No,
Okay.
I'm actually coming up to do a special event with the university. Last year I wasn't able to attend that, but it just so happens I'm going to be in the neighborhood, so I'll get to meet you guys, any of you that are going to be there. So that'll be great.
Sounds good.
All righty.
Thank
All right,
you.
guys, well, let me know. keep posting on the discussion forums, have fun playing with the numbers, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay, thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.